Hello and welcome to Retropower Uncut episode 79. I was just saying, it's rapidly approaching on the 100 mark, so maybe some suggestions on something cool we could do for the 100th episode. So this week we'll start with the clipper, largely messing around with the soft top. We're recovering the soft top and redoing the inside headlining, which is part of it, and then there's like a sort of insulative pad that sits between the two. And in typical German fashion, it's very well engineered but very complicated, so we've been stripping everything apart and then getting the frame back on the car and rebuilt with all the seals, etc., so we can just test the motion of the frame and get it on there, because I suspect that fitting the new cover is going to be a lot easier with it on the car, so we can easily open and shut it and get to all the different parts of it without it flying around on a bench. So that's largely what we've been on with that. John's been laying out some of the wiring, which I think he'd started last week. But that's about where we're at with that. We're waiting on quite a lot of parts on that at the minute, because it's been one that's been set aside for a while. Now we've got back into it. One of the things we were doing was planning all the jobs going forward, and then starting to list the parts. And that actually ties in with something I might do on another episode. Is a lot of people ask about how we manage the projects, so I might go into how we do our project management on another episode. Yeah, it links in with that, in that we've been basically planning all the forward jobs on that, and therefore that generates what parts we're going to need. So Utah, James is literally jacking it up right now to do the rear dampers. I mentioned last week the mounts for those had gone away to be anodised. They've just come back, so we're just getting those fitted up at the moment. And the tank was also being anodised. George has now refitted that, got it all fully installed, done the pipe work for the breathers, and that is looking pretty special. I'm really happy. I think all involved with that need a pat on the back, because it looks superb. Everything's hidden away. We've got some little anodised caps to go over those orange vented caps just as the finishing touch, but looks superb. So once we've got these rear dampers on, we're just going to do the spaces on the front spring pans, which have just come back from plating today, and then we'll be ready for a test drive in that. So I might get out in that late today. Worst case, early next week. Mustang, so I have a little stroll over here. We've just been on with exhaust. So James has been on with the exhaust on that for the latter part of last week and the early part of this week. And he's almost completely done. It's all next door at the minute, with Scott doing the final welds on it. So it's kind of a team effort on this one. James has been doing all the cut and fit and tack and fabricating all the brackets and basically all the design and cut work. And then Scott's kind of the best of the bunch when it comes to TIG welding, so it's all going to Scott for the final welding. And then we've just got to finish the slash cuts on the tails once we're happy with the angle of those, and that'll be exhaust system done on that. I think Adam's just been fitting some new plug leads we've just got from Magnacore, because the ones that were supplied with the engine, well, one of them was burnt and the lengths weren't really ideal, so we've had a new set made to measure by Magnacore. So that's where we're at with that. Manta, largely been on with coolant plumbing, just trying to do a really neat job of the way the heater hoses and the radiator hoses run. So we've been making a modification to the top hose spigot on the radiator so we can get a really tight bend in there. And then we've done some threaded fittings for the heater hoses where they come off the inlet manifold. So we could get like a really tight 180 at the front, which brings it out the front and directly under in the valley, basically under the inlet manifold. And then on the back of the head, there's another one with a threaded fitting, so we could get a really nice, neat 90-degree fitting off that. And then they go up to the actual heater matrix itself. So that's looking good. We're pretty much on the brink now of firing that up. I think we were waiting for the plating, which I just mentioned, came back, and that's got a part on it for the auxiliary belt tensioner. So once that's on there, I think we're almost ready to get coolant in there and fire that up. And actually that applies to this as well. John's literally just filling fluids on this. I've been tearing my hair out with wiring on it. Really frustrating. And in a similar vein to the clipper, everything except the engine management is standard. And the car was in pretty good shape when it came, and the loom looks mint on it. So we basically just cleaned it up and put the loom back in. But stupidly, we didn't test anything on the loom before we put it back in. And when I went to fire the electrics up, I could sum it up by basically saying nothing worked on it, and I'm not even exaggerating. And it's initially I just thought, oh, there's obviously a main power failure here somewhere. But actually working through it, there was just individual faults with basically every electrical component on the car, or every electrical part of the wiring. So I've had to pull a lot of the loom apart because it was all essentially neatly taped up by somebody previously over a load of really bad joints. So there were a load of wiring joints I needed to fault find. There were some damaged bits of the loom which had been taped over mysteriously in the past. The heater blower switch didn't work. There was a problem with the hazard warning light switch. The wiring to the headlight switch had been messed around with and then taped over and wasn't working as it should. Had various bad earths on it. So yeah, massive hair tearing out exercise, but yesterday finally got all of that working, sorted, neat as it should be. Engine management wiring's now working. I fired the ECU up, got a base map on there ready to start it up. I've just got some fused relays through in the post today which are going in for the fuel pump and cooling fan. I will be ready to fire this, or at least attempt to fire it up by the end of today, I'd say. So that's good progress on that. On the subject of hair tearing out jobs, I'm about to start putting the graphics on this. So obviously we've been doing the door skins, reskinned the doors, then went through to Gaz and Steve to do the paint work. Because this orange is particularly horrible colour when it comes to colour matching, we had the paint mixed using the scanner that scans the colour and generates the code, because mixing it off the original code, even the tiniest variation in smaller increments than you can even really measure on the scales when they're mixing the paint can throw it out. So you've really got to visually match it. So they did initially a scan to get the mix, did a mix, and then it was a case of manually tinting to get it matched to an existing panel. I think the bootleg the paint mix company had. But even so, we wouldn't want to take the risk of just painting one panel, so we do the colour blowing basically down the side. So they did all the prep work on the door, painted the doors, but then at the same time, in the booth at the same time, they had the car masked up with the whole body side flatted back and prepared for paint, so they could blow in with literally the same colour that we painted the door at the same time. We could blow colour down the rear half of the wing and the front half of the quarter, and then re-lacquer that whole body side. And it's worked really well, the colour match is spot on. But now I'm plunged into the job of reapplying the graphics, which you think would be easy, but actually I've done these 1600 Sport graphics before. The main stripe's fine, the back bit's fine. The bits over the arches are an absolute pain because it's almost like the radius they've been cut to is not exactly the same radius as the arch, and they always try and bunch slightly. And it's just an absolute pain. You try and get it hot and really hot with a heat gun so you can almost shrink the vinyl in as you get it on there, but trying to get it without any little bunches in it is a pain. So by the end of today, I'm fully expecting I'll be on suicide watch on that one. And speaking of suicide watch, Vader's over there. It went away to have PPF, that's paint protection film, applied to it. And in an ironic turn of events, the wing got damaged in the process of doing the paint protection film. So it's come back so we can repaint the offside front wing. The whole of the rest of the kit, the whole rest of the car has been PPF'd, and the kit's been cut for that wing. So it's going to be a case of us painting that wing, polishing it up, refitting it, and then it can go back to have that last bit of PPF fitted. So I'm thankful that it's black and a front wing, because we could just unbolt the part, paint it away from the car, and the colour match won't be an issue. So it's, as damage could go, it's the best case scenario. E-Type, which actually is under this cover, we've done a little bit of work on that. The next step we want to do on this is scanning the rear end so we can start designing the rear bumpers and the reshape of the valance. But there was accident damage on the back, and we wanted to have the upper rear, I think they call it the tonneau panel actually, but this rear panel here, we wanted that to be at least approximately the right shape. So we've loosely tacked in a repair panel. We've cut the old one out and loosely tacked in a repair. The exact shaping of it we'll do once we've designed the bumpers. We'll effectively get a model of those bumpers there and use that to finish the metalwork of the rear to make it a perfect match to the bumper. Because the bumper will be CAD designed, we'll know it's exactly symmetrical in the right shape. But we want something that's almost the right shape to scan to get the bumper near, if that makes sense at all, rather than scanning something that's accident damaged and then finding that the bumper we designed isn't really the general shape of the back of an E-Type. So that's done. Next step will be scanning that. Once George has finished the CAD work for the Stratos rear window cover, which he's getting on really nicely with. I'm really happy with where we're at on that. I think there were a couple of criticisms of the design, but I suspect it's in a sort of sketch over the top of a photo. It probably doesn't really represent very accurately how it's going to look in the final form, and I can kind of visualise how it's going to look, and I think it's going to look great. So I'm looking forward to that one taking shape. Now, I think on that note, I'm going to hand over to Nat in the metal shop. So that's it from me, and I'll see you next week.
Right, well, thank you, Cal, and welcome to another episode of Retropower Uncut, and welcome to the fabrication shop of carnage, as we've got stuff going on everywhere. So I'll try and give you a quick whistle-stop tour of what exactly is going on in here this week. So we're going to start here in the relative calm of the Churchill Jaguar area, where Stu's been beavering away as he always does, and next to me is a rather nice door skin that he's just finished making. Tom had just done put a weld along it for him about 2 hours ago off the top of my head, but Stu's been very busy building the door frame, which you would have seen part of last week. That's all now finished. The fabrication's done on that. That's been a pretty major trial of patience and skill, but it's now built. And as I pointed out to Stu the other day, doing this sort of job, that's kind of one of the hardest bits of the job. You've got to expect it to be a little bit challenging. So it's no great surprise that it was, really. I think he was thinking it should have been easier than it was. But anyway, here we are. We have a door fabricated, looking really good. Behind this door skin, there we go, unveiling its innards there. So that's the door skin, and then, sorry, that's the door frame, and then here we have the complete door skin, which needs metal finishing, but is basically shaped now and fits the car and is ready. If I spin it around, it's all folded over, ready for clinching onto the door frame. So that's good progress there. I'm probably knocking the microphone and making all sorts of noises there, but there we have the major sort of chunk of progress on Churchill. Is we're now pretty close to having a door for this side. Stu's now moved on for a bit, just sort of walked away from that for a little bit to carry on with getting the rear window area done. He's been working on getting the C-pillar section shaped up the last bit of today. He's been cracking on with that, and also doing the I don't know if that's clamped in or not. Yeah, I can take that out. This little fixture we made for the rear windows, he's been using that. In fact, I'm going to put that down there so it doesn't fall out. He's been using that to double check the symmetricality of the rear window apertures. They're not going to be perfectly the same, but they're going to be very, very close. They're going to be closer than they were originally, let's put it that way. So he's been making sure that the curvature around here is correct, because he's got to make the infill piece between this C-pillar and the inside of the rear window shut there, the quarter window shut. And then he's obviously got to put on the top section and start work on the quarter panel and get this quarter all to the same stage as that side. But it's all coming together really quite well now. Obviously the theory's been trialled on that side. The practice isn't the same as just copying it, as we've said, because the dimensions are a bit different. Just spotted actually, sorry, in the background. That is the piece he's been shaping up rather nicely for the rear window aperture. You can see that's in one piece, shrunk on that side, stretched on that side, folded over, and that'll be welded in to finish the quarter window frame. So yeah, all coming together now. Oh, and hang on, bit of MDF, which he's been using as well as that template, just to check the dimensions and make sure everything's working out nicely. So there we go. That's where he's at with all of that. That's coming together really quite well. Next week, going to be perilously close to the main bit in the middle being done, the main chunk of the quarter done, the door basically being done. There'll be final fettling left to do, but those major chunks should be pretty much getting there next week. Then he'll be moving on. I think he'll be quite happy to move on away from doors then and get on to the rear section of the quarters and start shaping up the rear sections of the quarters. So yeah, it's quite exciting. This is all starting to come together quite well now. So that's where Stu's been at in terms of Churchill Jag progress. Other things going on, this is obviously progressing, being moved off its jig. Over here we have the Land Cruiser, which is now on the very, very last. It's very, very hard. The last bit of metalwork is very, very, it's always the difficult point. You get a longer and longer list of little things the nearer to the end. If I might wander over here, so I'm in camera a bit. You get a longer and longer list of little jobs. The nearer you get to the end of metalwork, the more little things you find. And we've been going round and round that iterative process. and we've now got to the stage where we think we've got everything. There was literally a couple of captive nut plates to weld in for the retention straps for the fuel tanks, some holes to put in for the wiring for the fuel pump and fuel level sender, and for the fuel pipe work coming out of the tank enclosure, which is under the seats, and a few other little bits, some couple of captive nuts. Tom's been stud welding on a load of studs under the rear and down a couple of sections on the bulkhead to carry fuel lines and brake lines at the front, and to carry the crossover cable between the two batteries in the back. So he's been getting on with that. That's now an hour away from coming off the spit. It basically will be coming off the spit as soon as we've not got other vehicles in the way. That'll be coming off the spit. So all going great guns there. And then over here, I think there was probably, I imagine Cal talked about Mustang exhaust system. Well, here we have a chunk of Mustang exhaust. We had a bit of a lapse of pre-planning on our part in terms of ordering argon for the TIG welder, so we ran out. Well, we didn't quite run out, we nearly ran out, and then our supplier was a bit late. Their truck got stuck, and something occurred with our gas supply, which meant that we got a bit stuck in terms of TIG welding, and then other jobs have got in the way. So we're about to, Scott's about to get on with TIG welding this lot together, but I've kind of hogged the fabrication bench, doing what I've been working on, which is making some big heavy bits of fabrication. I needed the flat table, because I've been making some fixtures up for what we're going to go and have a look at in just a sec, which is the Escort. So I'm going to run around this way, charge around here, and we'll wander over to the Mark 1 Escort, which last week was obviously being blasted, and we had a good look at it, and it needs a lot of work, which in the world of Mark 1 Escorts is no great surprise. However, this one did look like a really, really, really clean, really tidy car, and a bit in the same way as the Land Cruiser caught us out, because we're pretty used to seeing rusty cars. This one caught us out a little bit as well, in that all who'd seen it had pronounced it an exceptionally good example. I think the word unicorn was used a couple of times, and it's very low mileage, extremely clean, tidy car, but we've basically got rust, in a little bit of rust, in almost every panel. And it's at the point where, really, to repair it, it needs most of the panels. So we've just put the order in for all of the panels that are going on this car, which is, as I say, the vast majority of the car. You will see as that develops. But that necessitates, it would have been going on the jig anyway, but it now necessitates a bit more jig work than I was originally thinking, because we're going to need to be able to locate external panel work with a minimum of structure to hold it together. This will all develop, and you'll be able to see in the coming weeks, but basically I'm doing quite a lot of extra fixtures, so I've been working through all that in my head today, and we've been ordering materials and things, because I need to do things like fixturing the door posts so that I can fixture the hinges, so that when we rebuild the body sides with new ones, we can locate the door hinges in the correct locations. So I've got to fixture those. I've got to fixture the front and rear panels. I'm going to need aperture jigs for the engine bay, for the boot, for the doors, and for the front and rear screens. So I've got to make little aperture jigs for all of those. So I've got quite a lot of fixturing to do basically on this, to make sure that when it's all repanelled with all the nice new panels, that they're all the correct shape. And obviously we've got an existing bonnet and boot, so we can use those for alignment initially. They were well aligned to start with when we first got the car, so we can trust the apertures there. And again, the doors fitted well, as the car was, so we can use so we know the apertures are good now, which is a good start point, because that makes fixturing those very easy. In the background, you may or may not be able to hear, I think Cal referred to the Golf VR6. In the background, you may or may not be able to hear the fact that that is now up and running and being noisy in the background. So that's what that is, if you can hear that in the background. That sounds like it's up and running. So yeah, that's where we're at with the Escort. Surprisingly poorly. Caught us out a bit on that one. No surprise in terms of Escorts, but you know, a 50-something thousand mile, very, very clean appearing, not really messed with to any great extent. Few bits of welding here and there, but not really messed with to any great extent. About as clean a bill of health as you're going to get on an Escort, and it basically needs almost everything replacing. So that's standard car restoration procedure really, is buy car, throw 95% of car in bin and start again. We found that with so many projects, we should know by now. It's just that this, and as I say, going back a little bit, the Land Cruiser, both appeared to be about as clean an example as you'd ever get, and actually under the skin, whilst not bad in terms of Escorts, it does need nearly every panel replacing or heavily repairing. So that's where we're going with that one. Lots of metal work. You get lots to see on that, because that's going to be going on the jig. Lots of fixturing and lots of new bits. So yeah, watch this space on that one. Moving on from that, Jensen in the background, we're hoping to be back on with that again very, very soon now. We've got the tool to do the roof, as we've mentioned before. We need to get that moulded in. The problem is just juggling workload through the body shop now. The Morris is now in the paint booth, masked up, ready for final paint. So if not tomorrow, I would think it'll be Monday for paint on that. I'm being guarded in my statements here, but that should be beginning of next week in final paint. Obviously the Escort's gone next door. Cal will have probably been past, will have covered that. Cal will have covered that. And Gaz and Steve are doing the final prep on the last few little bits and bobs for the Morris, the last few panels. I think all the main panels are prepped, but they're just doing the final bits like I can see Steve working on now, the slam panel and the front radiator cross member and the various sort of more mechanical parts that need painting to go on that. The inside of the car is now painted. The inside of the doors is now painted. Obviously, it's a different colour inside to the external colour, as mentioned before, as mentioned last week. Well, that's now done. The inside of the doors is painted. So it is just the outside of the shell, outside of the doors, all the other external panels, and then there's sort of various more mechanical bits that need painting. So it's very, very close. Basically, next week, all fully painted. So that'll be a nice step forward. Then Morris can move around to assembly shop, and we can then get on with some of the other work. The Land Cruiser will be in for paint, and then also we're going to try and pull in some work on the Jensen as well to try and get on with that. So yeah, lots and lots and lots going on. Hopefully I've covered the bulk of it, I think. I don't think I've forgotten anything too drastic. And yeah, exciting times in terms of lots of heavy metal work going on over the next few weeks. So yeah, have a good one, and we shall see you again soon.